Jeff watched the pathetic pile of rust lunge out of the parking lot. His heart raced, which had tripled when Mike had almost spotted him, settled back to its normal rhythm. As the junk heap of the wheels clunked down the road, Jeff pressed back against the pizzeria's warped siding. Immediately, he whelped and stepped away. He'd forgotten the paint wheel wood was so wet. Shaking himself off, Jeff dug in his pocket and pulled out his old flip phone. He punched in a number. One ring. Click. After the click, all Jeff heard was silence. No, not silence. His sister's breathing came through the line, faint and uneven. Max? Yeah? The word was soft but chipped off. Even with just one word, Jeff knew Max was on edge. It's showtime, Jeff said. As soon as he's back, get the guys, and meet me here. I think I found a way in. Max said nothing. Jeff pressed the phone close to his ear. He couldn't even hear her breathing now. Max? Finally, Max repeated, yeah. The tone was even edgier. The one word poked at Jeff's ear like a thorn. Time to get paid, Jeff said. Max sighed in his ear, then hung up. Maxine dropped her phone on the sofa and put her face in her hands. How had she gotten herself into? I'm not a bad person, Maxine muttered, muffled into her palms. Her conscience laughed at her and accused safely. Then why you agreed to spy on Mike? Maxine shook her head. Then she felt the anger and hurt rise up. The feelings had goaded her into betraying Mike. He deserved it, she told herself, when she occupants to Jane's request to search Mike's house. Sure, Mike was never rude to her. He always said hello and goodbye and thank you. It wasn't like Mike ignored her. He did interact with her, but he never really saw her. If he did, he realized how much she felt for him. Jane had caught Maxine on a bad day, the day Maxine had put on extra makeup and wore a new shirt in hopes of catching Mike's eye, the day that Mike had looked right through her, as usual. That was why she agreed to do something that was not so who she was. Yeah. But then you're the one who suggested messing with his job. Her conscience probed her. Not exactly, she argued back. All I said was, Maxine's conscience snorted at her, and Maxine dropped at her hands. She looked around the scabby little house and shook her head. Mike didn't deserve what she and her brother and the others were about to do. But how could she stop it now? I'm scum, Maxine told herself. Jeff grinned at his crowbar, easily snapped the old padlock. The rust hang and metal dropped at the concrete with a thunk, and Jeff reached out to grab the equal rusty vertical handle of the rolling steel door. The sun shone directly at the back of the pizzeria, and its heat held the still wet platform of the pizzeria's loading dock. Steam swelled upward. The slithering mist made Jeff think of graveyard scenes of the horror movies. He shivered and immediately shook off the sensation, annoyed with himself. Putting on the swagger of confidence he was starting to lose, Jeff turned and faced the man leaning against his old green pickup truck. Hank, heaviest with long grayish-sand brown hair and scuffy goatee to match, was lounging against the trunk's chrome grille. His thick forearms crossed over the large belly. Hank's down-turned, pale blue eyes studied Jeff like he couldn't decide whether to laugh at Jeff or kill him. Jeff had always been a little afraid of Hank, and even more so today. Hank had an old wooden baseball bat resting on his beefy shoulder, and the way he twirled the bat was more than a little off-putting. Jeff shifted his gaze at Carl, Hank's son, and even though Jeff had known Carl for several years, they've done time together, both as juvies and adults. Jeff had to admit Carl imitated him too. Dark hair. Carl's eyes had the same downward tilt as his dad's, but Carl's eyes were spaced wider apart, and they were brown like his mother's. Something about the way Carl's eyes squinted at the world, and the way his thin lips were usually pressed into a snarky smile, made Jeff perpetually nervous around Carl. Like Hank, Carl has a goatee, but this was much sparser than his dad's. Dad, Jeff thought, made Carl even seem more dangerous. Right now, for instance, Carl was toying with a 6-cell flashlight he had tucked in his belt as he threw menacing glances at Max German Shepherd Bonesy. Jeff thought if Carl had been carrying a gun, he'll probably have shot the dog. Jeff would never shoot a dog, especially Max's dog, but the dog has been being a pain. He was barking his head off like he was announcing an incoming apocalypse. Bonesy was a pickup cab, and Max was studying by the driver's side door. Her face was pale and her lips were pressed tightly together. Hank saw the direction of his son's gaze and turned to look at the spun-up dog. Bonesy was really going for it. Front was building up to his jolts as he barked and growled. Dog's gonna be a problem, Hank said in his deep, scratchy voice. Carl kept eyeing Bonesy. Yep, Carl said. His voice was higher pitched than his dad's, but it had a coarse tone. Hank spun the bat again and then lazily glanced around the nearby trees and the vacant expanse of asphalt behind the pizzeria. That's a whole lot of noise, he said. Sure is, Carl agreed. Hank pushed up the trunk's grill and stepped into the open driver's window. He looked at Max. Told you not to bring that dog, he said. His tone was more than a little threatening, but it didn't seem to faze Max. Max lifted her chin and glared at Hank. Jeff knew that Max wasn't afraid of Hank or Carl. She knowed them. And Hank's wife, Darlene, since Max was a little kid, because they were neighbors. She fought Hank and Darlene as an aunt and uncle. She told Jeff. She tried not to think about Carl at all. She put up with him. She didn't like him. Hank shifted the bat. Carl stepped up next to his dad. He gave Max what Jeff thought was an awfully close to a creepy leer. Jeff needed to get things under control. Stepping away from the now open loading dock door, Jeff took 3 long strides to reach the pickup. He pointed at Bouncy and shouted at Max, "Shut him up now!" He lifted his crowbar, "Or I will," he said as severely as he could. Max lifted an eyebrow at her brother. Then she reached into the pickup and put her hand on Bonesy's shoulder. She leaned through the window and began to speak smoothly to the dog. Jeff couldn't make out her words. Whatever Max had worked, Bonesy's bark subsided into a deep rumble at the back of his throat. Jeff quickly turned to Hank and Carl. Reaching to the bed of the truck, Jeff grabbed a large army green camel duffel bag. "Come on," he said if he was the boss. Jeff wasn't sure he was the boss of anything. Yeah, this had been his idea, and he'd been the one to ask Hank and Carl for help. But now that they were getting ready to head inside, Jeff was feeling like he wasn't as in charge as he wanted it to be. Jeff motioned up the other man to follow him as he headed back to the open loading dock door. As he went, he saw Max getting into the pickup cab. Max watched her brother lead Hank and his idiot son into the old pizzeria. "Or I will," she whispered, mimicking Jeff's voice. Maxine Jeff would never hurt Bonesy or any other animal. He'd just been posturing for Hank and Carl. Still, the words had stung. Maxine wrapped her arm around Bonesy's neck. She stroked his black and butterscotch fur in a long, smoothing motion. "There you go, boy," Maxine said. "It's all right. Shh." Bonesy's grumble mumble subsided into a high-pitched whine. He began to pant heavily, and his whole body trembled. He turned and gazed Maxine's several legs before looking back towards the pizzeria. When the dog's gaze settled into the old pizzeria, his trembling intensified and his whines turned into whimpers. Picking up her dog's obvious fear, Maxine's mouth went dry. Her stomach was as tight as a drum, and it felt like her intestines were clenching in rhythm to her heart's driving beat. She peered through the pickup's windshield and looked at the obscure area beyond the locking door. She pulled Bonesy closer. Jeff had thought that getting past the loading dock door was going to be an open semi. He needed to access the rest of the pizzeria. However, the loading dock, he discovered, was separate from the rest of the restaurant by the locking metal door. Not wanting to fail what had been his idea, Jeff ran to the door and gave it a strong kick. The kick came more from desperation than confidence, but, to Jeff's surprise, it worked. The lock creaked, and the door snapped on its hinges, flying backwards. The door landed on a reverberant bwomp. Jeff exhaled in relief and looked at Hank and Carl nonchalantly, as if he totally known he had the strength to knock down the door, moving forward with a "yeah, I'm the man" strunt. Jeff stepped through the doorway and found himself in the shadowy kitchen lit by only a couple of dim fluorescent bulbs. The faint light had only revealed the kitchen's expanse, but it did have a fine job of shoplifting the hundreds of cobwebs networked through the dusty space. Hank and Carl looked around, both staring at heap of their weapons of choice. Jeff spoke up. "Let's go check out what we have to work with before we start," he suggested. Neither Hank or Carl argued with Jeff, so he led them out of the kitchen. Stepping to the long, dark hallway, Jeff shook off a heebie-jeebies that had started on the loaded docks. For the next 10 minutes, Jeff and his henchmen meandering through the empty restaurant. "This is going to be a gas," Carl said, as they did a quick, eager tour on the place. After one circuit through the pizzeria, they returned to the huge rack of the dining room. Standing just inside the archway that separated the dining room from the deserted lobby, the men exchanged grins. "Okay," Jeff said, "let's be quick, but thorough. Maximum damage, minimum time." Hank and Carl exchanged a glance. Then they nodded. Anything that looks valuable, Jeff said. Grab it. We'll settle up when we're done. Good? Hank and Carl nodded again in unison, one lift and one drop of their goatee chins. Jeff, suddenly feeling more excited than fear, let out a whoop. He brandished his crowbar like a berserker about to lead into battle. This might have been inspired by a Viking movie he had seen the night before, but whatever. He was fired up and ready to go. Let's go to it, Jeff shouted. The three men glanced at the fist bump, then charged into action. Jeff and Carl ran to the dining room. Hank turned and strode into the lobby. After a couple steps, Jeff and Carl's paths diverged. Carl marched across the dining room, aiming to the curtain-covered stage. Jeff veered left, heading to the arcade. Angling towards the games area at a full run, Jeff was rising and getting ready to swing his crowbar to go to the glass cabinet of the prize country. Jeff yelled, "Hee-yaw!" His berserker energy exploded into a frenzy as he brought down the crowbar in a dinging expanse of glass. A satisfying crack and crash preceded a rain-like trickle of glass that showered down onto the black and white floor. Jeff grinned and raised his crowbar again, striking the glass over and over. Jeff quickly obliterated the prize cabinet. He pulverized the glass into sparking fragments that twinkled into arrays of sparse lights that illuminated the area. Trumped over the nearly vaporized glass, grinding his heel against any large shards he saw, Jeff tore into the arcade and began trashing every game console he encountered. Pinball machines, glass discarded the same way the prize counter did. Plastic bumpers and flippers cracked. Wood cabinets splintered. The other arcades could come in a similar way as Jeff's crowbar chewed through them. Jeff's brain had gone through hibernation as he gave in to the fury of striking and pounding in the machines. Outraged beyond belief, the abolition charged Jeff up and gave him the strength to swing the crowbar over and over and over. Sweat poured off his face and his breath came into a jerky haze, but he didn't care. He was having the time of his life. Hank was pursuing the music only he could hear. The drum beat of jazz rock songs were thumping his head, and he was matching his moves to the rhythm, lunging left and right, cross-stepping, spinning, and hip-wiggling. Hank was dancing his way past all the glass-framed posters in the front hallway. As he went, Hank was shattering the fragile expanse, hopping fluently out of the way as jagged fragments flew towards him. In spite of his size, Hank thought he was pretty darn graceful in his ability to avoid flying shards. Hank danced his way down the hall and back, crushing glass and battering frames. He was having a blast. Back in the lobby, Hank took care of the posters there too. Then, full on his groove and not wanting to stop the boogie mood that had overtaken him, Hank started on the walls, wielding his bat as nimbly as one of those baton twirlers who prance around in front of the marching bands. His trusty bat running gape holes in lobbies dry. Clouds of dust exploded out of the walls. Hank figured he was probably turning white, but he didn't care. He was having too much fun. Carl hopped into the stage and grinned at the closed curtains. Having been told about Freddy's pizzeria, Carl knew what was probably behind the curtains. He couldn't wait to start his annihilation, twirling his flashlight like he was spinning a parade rifle on the drill line. Carl effected a cocky stutter as he stepped towards the gape of the curtains, lifting a large flashlight in his left hand, posing to strike. Carl struck his head between the curtains, smirking. He called out, "Honey, I'm home." Carl glanced at the darkened expanse. His brain grish faded. Frowning, his flashlight wavered. He used his right hand to pull back the curtains some more, and the dining room weak light could brighten the backstage area. He looked at the right. "Huh?" Carl said. The old crusty Freddy characters he expected to find waiting in the beaten of smears weren't there. The backstage was empty. Carl stepped forward and let the curtains close behind him. He felt like he was walking to the choking smoke of the dense fire. He could see little more than a faint shapes around him. Then the air felt thick and weird. Kinda felt like, well, kinda like the smell that would come under his family's house when the rats he poisoned had died and started decomposing. Carl looked around, half-heartedly seeking something to destroy. He thought there might be costumes he could shred and props he could wreck. But Carl didn't try very hard to find something to bash with his flashlight. He was losing interest in the backstage area. Yeah, sure, that was it. The problem wasn't that Carl was starting to feel spooked. Carl was feeling very strange, even though his life, as an uninterested underling to his mechanical dad during the day and a rabid sports fan after hours, left little room to institution. His gut was telling him that something was wrong here. Something felt off. Carl quickly scurried back to the curtains. He jumped off the stage, surveying the empty dining room. Carl listened to the sounds of crackling and crashing and scattering coming from the arcade in front hallway. The sounds settled him even better. They gave him back his plunk. His smirk returned. Then he turned to face the stage, laughing at himself for letting the backstage get to him. Carl was tempted to thump his nose in the stage curtains, which were still swaying slightly in his movement around them. Then he got a better idea. Carl's parents had never instilled into him the idea that he was anything other than a disappointment who wouldn't amount to much. As a result, Carl has been walking around for years with a frustration ball of "I hate you" in his stomach. It wasn't like he hid his dismay to the world. He flung around plenty of grousy and sarcasm, but Carl was never fully expressed the depths of his scorn. Now he was going to. Tucking his flashlight in his belt, Carl started whistling as he unzipped his fly. "The place smells like a sewer," Carl muttered himself. Carl planted his feet on the base of the stage. "Fire in the hole," he said. Jeff cackled in giddy elation as he looked down the fount of quarters erupt in the air, tingling and thrilling and chirping. The coins scattered around the black and white squares of floor. When he hit the dirty checkerboard, the coins spun and rolled and hopped. "That's what I'm talking about," Jeff said. He looked down at the coins and started to bend over to gather them, but then his gaze landed on the next machine-locked coin box. "One more," he said. He stepped to the next machine and used his crowbar to pry open the vault. It gave away as easily as the last one did, and another waterfall change glashing out of the floor. This time, Jeff couldn't help himself. He dropped to his knees, then he grabbed a handful of glittering bounty. "Yes!" he shouted as he raised his fist and savored the feel of the coin's rough, round edges. Yeah, they were just quarters. Not gold doubloons, but Jeff still felt like an adventurer unearthing treasure. The last time he'd been this dribbler was when he hit the modest jackpot with the quarter slot at the casino in Vegas. Then his haul hadn't been all that great, but that sound of dings and hoots and cats and coins had given him a rush. He felt the same rush now. Jumping to his feet, Jeff shot toward the next machine in line. He raised his crowbar. After expressing his opinion of Freddy's and the world in general, Carl has moved out to the kitchen. There he found plenty of things to beat up on. Carl hooted the mountains of red plates and saucer shots forward out of the stainless steel sleeve units he just knocked over. The dining ware exploded over the floor, and Cobb humped down the broken pieces, his heavy boots grinding into the crockery sand-like bits. "Yeah!" Carl shouted. He turned toward the expanse of stainless cabinets in the opposite wall. Anticipating more ruinous fun, Carl threw open one of the cabinet doors. The shelf behind the door was empty. Carl let out a involuntary sigh. His bubble burst. Shrugging, Carl slammed the cabinet door. "Whatever," Carl muttered. He moved on to the next cabinet, flinging its door open, fully prepared to dump more fragile plummet or whatever it was. Carl's shoulders slumped when he once again found empty shelves. Angered, Carl tried the next door, and then the next. Empty, empty. Carl tried once more. The last cabinet wasn't empty. The small, painted plastic and metal cupcake sat in the cabinet's bottom shelf. Bright pink, with googly eyes and two big white teeth, the cupcake sported one upright candle, was centered on a small white plate. Carl frowned. "What the..." Hank ambled to the dining room, whistled along the music in his head. Ever since he started pounding the dry wall, Hank had been hearing the frantic notes of the Turbo song from Carmen. Hank loved that music. He's always made him feel like a winner when he heard it. It was become sort of his personal theme songs. Hank twirled his bat as he rambly passed a collapsed stack of bent and dirty chairs. His whistle got louder, and he directed the music with his free hand. The urge to dance returned as Hank looked for something else to destroy. A chatter came to the arcade, and he looked that way, tempted to join Jeff. Hank, however, didn't want to step on the kid's toes. Jeff tried to act tough, but Hank knew that the guy was the closest pussycat. Hank also knew Jeff was afraid of him. Hank thought that was a hoot, and that he played into as much as possible, but today, he decided to let Jeff feel like he was the leader. Nah, Hank could find something else to play with. Maybe the kitchen, Hank thought. He started muttering into the direction, using his bat to destroy as much furniture as he could along the way. The kitchen, although not by any means bright, was lit enough that Carl hadn't needed his flashlight to see. The cupcake nestling in the miserable patch of darkness under the shelf above it. However, requiring more illumination, what was that thing? Carl lifted his flashlight, aimed its beam at the bulging white eyes nesting in the hot pink. The ants crawled in his skin, feeling like he'd gone backstage return. The cupcake was just plain wrong. The way it glanced appeared to the lock on Carl's made him want to. The cupcake blinked. Carl yelped. Before he could decide to do what about the animated mini cake, a resounding clang came from behind him. Carl spun around, not sure what to expect when he returned, but totally pent up and ready for, well, anything. Carl was relieved when he saw no movement except the black and white motion of two large copper pots hanging from the stainless steel rack above the heaving duty restaurant range. Carl rolled his eyes at his overreactions and reserved directions to return his attention to the weird little cupcake. He once again aimed his flashlight at the cupcake was gone. Carl snuck at his breath as he stared at the uneven light jitters out of the front of his flashlight. His gaze backed up to his hand. It was shaking. Well, hell yeah, it was shaking. Where did the cupcake go? His eyes as wide open as he could get them. Carl slowly rotated, clanging his flashlight as he swept the area around him with its beam. The blobbly ray of light cut through the kitchen's spotted grayness and landed on. Carl's eyes nearly popped out of his head. He found the cupcake. That wasn't all. The pink cupcake and its plate were now being held in a massive yellow fur hand. Carl's flashlight beam wagging at its rose upward to the cupcake when the light encountered the mouthy dingly yellow face of a massive chick with a huge mouth full of barred teeth. Carl only had a second to feel the urge of the shot before the psychopathic-looking bird lunged at him.